And shalom, everyone. It is February 23rd, 2022. We are reading and studying this morning Parashat Vayakhel. Going to focus a lot on the personality character of Betzalel, who is mentioned at the beginning of this Parsha. He has appeared already in the previous Parsha, in Ki Tisa, and what we're going to do in talking about Betzalel is look carefully at the way the text describes him and ask some pertinent questions about who this man is, what he represents, and what he could be saying, or what the Torah could be saying about the place of this kind of individual within the society. So, with no further ado, I'm going to turn to the text here. We're just going to read the text from the Torah, and then do some analysis of this. Here is the text. So we have the text from our Parsha, chapter 35, verses 30 to 35, and then a little bit more in chapter 36. And then I'm going to go back also to Ki Tisa in last week's Parsha. So here we go. And Moses said to the Israelites, Vayomer Moshe al bnei Yisrael, Re'u kara Adonai b'shem. See, Adonai has singled out by name, or has called by name, Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur Lamate Yehuda, Betzalel son of Uri son of Hur, tribe of Judah, Vayimale oto Ruach Elohim. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God. He has endowed him with the divine Spirit, Bechokma, Bituna, Uvedat, he calls it here, the ability, skill, ability, and knowledge, but literally it's wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, Uvechom Lacha, and every kind of work or craft. Velachashov Machshavot, which I would say is, he's translates it as to make designs, but chashov really has the sense of thinking, so it's to think thoughts, but we'll talk about that in a second. La'asot bezahav bakesef uvenechoshet, and to make things with gold, silver, and bronze or copper. Uvacharoshet even, to cut stones, lemalot, uvacharoshet eitz, and to carve wood, la'asot b'chol melachet machshavet, to do every kind of craft. Ulharot natan b'libo, he also gave him directions, and to give directions, and that is to say, he has the ability, lehorot, to give instruction. That ability, Natan Bilibo, God placed in his heart, who the Oholiav ben Achisamach lemateh. It was given to him, Betzalel, and to, I guess, his companion, partner, a man named Oholiav, who was son of Achasimach, who was a Danite. Mile otam chokhmat lev. He filled them up with wisdom or skill, Lasot kol melechet charash v'choshev, to do every kind of craft that involved cutting, embroidering, or designing. B'tchelet uvargaman uv'tolat hashani uv'shesh v'oreg, in the blue or purple or crimson yarns and fine linen, and of the weaver, v'chol v'choshvei machshavot, and all crafts and makers of designs. V'asab Betzalel v'oliav, and then let then Betzalel and Oholiav and all skilled persons, kol ish chacham lev, asher natan Adonai chachma utvuna bahema, to whom God has given wisdom and understanding in them, ladat lasot et kol melechet avodat hakodesh, to make all of the sacred artifacts, and to carry out ulechol asher tziva Adonai, and to all that God has commanded. Vayikra Moshe el Betzalel v'Oliav, so Moses called them, Ve'al kol ish chacham lev, and everybody else who is endowed with skill, asher natan Adonai chokhmah b'libo, that God gave them the wisdom or skill. Kol asher nasa'o libo, anyone who had the ability, l'karva al hamalacha la'asot otah, to come close to the work and to undertake the work and to do it. Vayakhel milifnei Moshe et kol hatruma, and they took all the things that Israel brought, etc., etc., etc. And so that's our seed. So I'm going to stop there. We get probably one of the most elaborate descriptions of an individual's capacity in this text. And so I'm starting out by saying that this individual Betzalel is singular. At least the Torah is making him out to be singular in the way that the Torah describes him, in ways that we're going to look very closely in just a moment. And by reading this passage, we're simply filled with all sorts of questions, which is, in addition to the characteristic questions of like, where do these things come from and all of that, but it's, what is where do people get this ability? I've shown you pictures of what these things look like. The pictures that I showed you are imagined recreations of these things, especially the weaving and the carving and the fashioning of the metals, the different gold, silver, and bronze or copper things that are involved there. So they require, as everyone knows, more than just a hobbyist's level of skill. We've all engaged in kind of crafts, even as a child, but there's a difference between just putting macrame together and to being a weaver. And any of you who have done art at a different level, or any kind of art, or had the pleasure to watch that or observe that, either close at hand through relatives, or by observing studio, or through your various travels and exposure in movies, etc. So we all get the impression that there's something, we often say it's something magical, it's something amazing that happens when someone is an artist or a craftsman in any field. Here the Torah knows of the fabric arts and the metal arts and the sculpting arts, in the sense that the carving arts, and to a certain extent the architectural arts, and understands that these different actions, vocations, skills are different, and there is a kind of implicit understanding that not everybody has this ability. Now that goes against the grain, I think, of a certain kind of understanding of human nature, which is that if you train a person enough, you could make them into something. That may be true, but that's a proposition that needs to be tested. Only certain people are able to become able to communicate in a way that is exceptionally gifted, or we use the word gifted. There are people that are able to do it, people are not able to do it. Some people can draw, some people can't draw. I can't draw. I suppose I could learn to draw, but it would be very difficult. Some people are musical, some people are not musical. In psychology, you have multiple intelligences. There are people that have musical knowledge, linguistic knowledge, mathematical knowledge, kinetic knowledge, and social knowledge. And there's some people who have knowledge in intelligences in all of these different areas, and then some people just don't. And and that's what makes humanity quite interesting. Uh, and the potential, I think, exists, but the potential for greatness, that's a question mark. Okay, so that's how we're starting. Go ahead, Alana.
We cannot forget Noah, who built an ark, which was amazing. Also, we had to make sure that no water came in and all this. So that's a big credit for Noah. Also, Moshe's mother, who made the little teva for Moshe, she had to have a talent. And also, I think it's very interesting that it says Chochmat Lev and not Chochmat Moach or Rosh. So
yeah. So
like
let me comment. Yeah, let me comment about those. So Noah's feat is an engineering feat. It's not an artistic feat. We do have certain artistic recreations of the ark, but they're nowhere near what the Torah describes. The Torah describes a box, basically. But the box, in order for it to function, it has to be engineered in a certain way so it won't fall apart. That might be the whole story right there, which is that the box is totally dependent on God, right? There's no rudder, there's no steering mechanism, there's no nothing. It just as impossible as the story is, its impossibility lends itself to the meaning, which is that this is a box that is going to be tossed and turned all over, and so Noah may not have any artistic capability. He may be able to follow instructions, or he may have been able, in the sense that the Torah is describing him as a character, to put things together. It never, by the way, tells us how he does it. It tells us how long it took him, but it doesn't tell us anything about this. It only gives us the dimensions of it. And I have interpreted that story in the past to show that the dimensions specifically are not the interesting part of it. It's the ratios between length to width to height that are the most important, and the ratios correspond to the ratios of a casket or sarcophagus of a human body in a box. And to me, that gives away the story, which is that it's almost science fictional in its capacity. It's you are leaving a world that is being destroyed, and you are going to emerge in a new world. And the box, the container, is the proportions of a human coffin. It's almost like Star Trek IV, the movie, where they send out Spock, in a casket. They launch him from the Enterprise, and everything destroyed after him. And somehow he, it's a science. That's why I say it's science fictional. In terms of the little ark, so yeah, the Moses' basket, people knew how to make baskets. That was certainly a craft, and she lined it with pitch. She made it waterproof. So there's a certain technology there. And what I would say is that, what we don't have a deep appreciation of, unless we really, really dive into the archaeology, is that the ancient world, had certain kinds of technologies that we're just not aware of, and that we think of that world as a kind of backwards world, but there were weavers and metallurgists and people who understood how to create things and create things of beauty, and some of these things are visible to us in collections and museums. Certainly, potters and smiths and all these kinds of things. That knowledge was known and goes back many thousands of years. In fact, thousands of years before the biblical era as well. So what I'm saying is that the idea of human skill and craft is known here, and the question is, where does it come from? Let's go to a deep analysis of the text, and we'll take a look here. Okay. So
you didn't say anything about Chochmat Alev.
Oh, Chochmat Alev. I'm sorry. The word Chochmat Alev. So Lev in the Torah and Lev in the Bible is the mind. The word Moach doesn't come to be identified as the seat of Moach in modern Hebrew is brain, but and Moach in rabbinic Hebrew is like marrow. It's the guk in a bone, the moach, right? So the heart, Chochmat Lev, is the heart is the seat of wisdom, and so there's the connection between wisdom and wisdom in order to make things, and that I think is what's going on here.
Maybe feelings also
Also,
should be involved.
absolutely. All right, so let's go into. So we have a text that this is parallel to the text that first mentions Betzalel is chapter 31. I'm gonna pull up a new discovery that I described. I'm just gonna make sure that you can see this. Here we go. Okay, here we go. This website is called Al HaTorah. Al HaTorah is like, it does all the things that I like to do when I study the Torah: look up words, compare texts, and color them, and all sorts of things. And it takes, I don't have to buy a pack of highlighters anymore to do this by hand. It does it all automatically, and we could spend a whole session on how to use this website. It does require a knowledge of Hebrew. Okay, so what I've done here on the page here is I've compared two passages. One is Shemot 31, 1 to 6, and this is Shemot 35, verses 30 to 35. And you see that it's very similar. In chapter 31, which was last week's Parsha, it says, Vayomer Adonai Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And so they say that's parallel to, this is, in chapter 31, God says to Moses, Re'eh, to Moses directly, you, Moses, see, Karati b'shem Betzalel. I have called out Betzalel by name. Okay? So this is just a preamble. And God is saying to Moses last week, God's saying, look, I've singled him out. I've called him out, okay? And this is a guy. This is a guy who's really, really amazing. And so here, Moses now, in our Parsha, Moses is relating this almost verbatim to the people. He's saying, Re'u, you, plural, see that Kara Adonai b'shem Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda. You are now going to see that God has singled them out. God has called them. Moses is now turning to the people and saying, you see that this is an individual, that God has filled them up with Ruach Elohim, Chokhmah, Tuna, etc. Okay, so I'm putting this up just because it's always fascinating to see how there are certain parallels in the Bible, and of course, what Moses says here is directly, it's almost word for word, what God has said to him before. Okay? But that's not the main point. The main point that I want to do is try and make the following case. Make the case that there's, as we've been saying all along, there's a story within the story. And the story within the story is all the different allusions to different things. So I pulled out different expressions in these verses. Kara b'shem. So God says, Karati b'shem, I called them out by name. So what is to call by name? It's a very rare expression in the Bible. And who gets called by name? Who gets called by name? When it says Karati b'shem. So I'm going to stop this and I'm going to pull up my Tanakh laboratory, okay, and show you that you can look up different. We're going to look. I'm going to share the screen in a second. How we look up all the different references to where the expression likro b'shem, likra b'shem, vaikra b'shem, vaikra b'shem, and so just by looking at, and there are 43 occurrences of that phrase in the entire Bible. And we see that a great majority of them are not God calling a human being, but human beings calling out to God. And in fact, the rare occurrences are when God singles out Betzalel. So most of the time, when we are using the expression likro b'shem, it's either Abraham or Enosh, right? This is in chapter 4 of Genesis. Vayikra et shmo Enosh az huchal likro b'shem Adonai, which means that in the early generations of humanity, there was an individual who was born to Shet, the son of Adam. His name was Enosh, and Enosh began to call out to God by name, and that people call, and that Abraham calls out to God by name several times, and that Moses calls out to God by name. So it's unusual that we have an individual who God singles out. So there's a kind of relationship here that we have people calling out to God, but here, very rarely, God singles out an individual, which tells us we need to put this individual in the frame of, well, there's something special about them. What's special about this individual is that this individual is actually singled out by God, which kind of leads to the dotted line here of what is a genius? What I'm going to put that question, let it dangle for a second, because that's where we're going. Okay. So back to the text. That's the likro b'shem. It means God is the one you call out, but here it's a kind of reciprocity that God is calling out to an individual. Now his name is Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur Lamate Yehuda. This is an unusual way to introduce a person. And I tried to look and see, and I don't have an example. I'm trying to think, I wish this was like the Bible contest. We could pull some kid up and say, who else is identified by two generations? It's quite unusual. I don't know if it exists anywhere. It's different from his fellow Oliva, or what's his name? Oliav, who is only identified by one parent, but here he's identified by grandparent. So the idea that he's linked to Yehuda tells us something. It tells us that he is in that special tribe, the tribe that will end up, as we know, becoming the leader tribe of Israel. And
Rabbi,
yes.
Your display is showing, I think, something from yesterday's discussion.
Okay, wrong. Let's try that again. Right. Okay, I'm sorry. We'll do this again. Sorry. There we go. How about this? Is it now? Ben Uri ben Hur? You got it? Okay. So we have Ben Uri ben Hur Lamate Yehuda. Va'amale oto ruach Elohim. I will fill him up with the spirit wind of God. Where else do we have the spirit of God? Well, ruach Elohim. This would be a good little quiz show, but I have it pulled it up in my little Torah lab here, Ma'abadat HaTanakh here. So Ruach Elohim occurs, the first time Ruach Elohim occurs is Va'aretz hayta tovavo al pnei hadam beruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. Vayishmu et kol Adonai mitalech vagan leruach hayom. Vayaver ruach al kol haaretz. So Ruach Elohim is a creation idea, okay? And there's one more important reference, which is from the story of Noah. With Joseph. Joseph appears before Pharaoh to interpret his dreams. Vayomer paro el avadav. Pharaoh says to his servants, "Hanimsach hazeh ish acher ruach Elohim bo?" Do we see anybody like this who has the Spirit of God in him? What that means is that there's something extraordinary. It's extraordinary capability that already hints back to creation. So Betzalel now is called by God. That's unique. Betzalel is Ruach Elohim. That's unique. There's only a couple other individuals that have that. It means they have extraordinary powers. Okay, let's go back to my my list of terms here. So, bechachma uvitfuna uvadat, that appears to be a specific terminology for craftsmanship. This phrase only occurs here with regard to Betzalel. What we do have elsewhere is chachma and dat, okay, but which is wisdom and knowledge. Those terms appear in parallel, but this unique threefold phrase only appears here, and that tells me that the set of skills necessary to be an artist craftsman are a unique set of skills. Chokhmah and dat, wisdom and understanding, those are knowledge skills for the conveyance of wisdom. But chokhmah, tvuna, and dat, that is the special set of knowledge skills that is necessary for creativity. And of course, the term uvechol melacha, where else does this term occur? Well, I'll save you the look into the concordance. This is a term also from creation. Okay, Vayakhel Elohim mikol melachto, that God completed all of his creative activity. And the words kol melacha also appear in the Sabbath restrictions. You cannot do kol melacha. You are forbidden from doing all sorts of manner of creative activity. From this term, we get the philosophical idea that Shabbat is a cessation of creative activity. In other words, we don't do things that change an item from one form to another. We don't do creative actions on Shabbat. We can engage in all kinds of different activity, but you can't do things that are building and creating and fashioning things, with certain exceptions. But malacha in general is understood to be a creative act. Lachashov machshavot, la'asot b'zahav b'kesef v'nechoshet, to design designs. And here this is very interesting, because the word lachshov in modern Hebrew is to think, and certainly in biblical Hebrew there's the idea of the mind. And I'll just pull that one up for a second and show you that all the different references to the mind, and I think I must have lost Nachashov, Machashavot. Okay, so there are very few references. I'll pull this up in a second to that is to say the specific idea of Lachashov Machshavot in reference to creative activity only occurs here, but we have in various other places the idea that human beings certainly engage in thinking. God saw that man was evil, and that all his inclinations, all his thinking all his designs were evil all day. In other words, there is the idea of cognition is related to creative thinking and being able to use your mind to fashion things with your hands. That's the idea here. So what we have in this whole idea is a little bit of reference or echo to creation, that within the personality of Betzalel, a unique person altogether, we have something that is kind of related to God. We have someone that is uniquely endowed with almost divine attributes. And that will take us into a very interesting direction, and I will go there right now. And that direction is, who gets to make sacred things in antiquity? This is William Propp. He's a commentator at the Anchor Bible. When did Betzalel receive his inspiration? Was he always talented? Ramban Nachmanides thinks he was destined for this great task from birth when he received his name. But it is also possible that God suddenly transformed him into a genius. Ruach Elohim, the wondrous manual skill, the ability to actualize the divine intent. The image of the inspired artist is not original to the Bible. By general ancient belief, the fine arts were founded in primordial mythic time. We have early on in the book of Breshit in Genesis 4 some account of there was Yaval and Tuvalkai, and these were individuals who were the originators of the crafts, of metal crafts, etc. The very first makers were gods. Okay? So this is part of the world that the Bible is emerging in, is a world in which this kind of activity, that is to say, art, creation, architecture, building, fashioning with hands, that is divine activity. And that already rings all the bells that we need in our minds. Because if that is an activity that is restricted to the gods, how does it get into the world? So, and what is the Bible trying to do here? And what does this person, Betzalel, really represent? So I'll continue. Latter-day cultic craftsmen, by the God's grace, are qualified to transform inert, profane matter into a semblance of the celestial. To design and build even ordinary structures requires divine assistance, for if God, he does not build a house, in vain its builders toil. That's a verse from Psalm, meaning that it's coming out of something divine. In this sense, the artist is a theologian, exempling divine activity and rendering it active and comprehensible. Like the prophet, he can also misuse his gift. In other words, being able to work with your hands, being able to create, is a divine activity. It links you to the divine, and it makes you a partner to the divine. In ancient other religions, I'll get to Marlene in a second, in other religions in antiquity, it was actually the gods, okay? But obviously, we don't have the gods here. We have God and an individual. So this text then is trying to answer a question, which is, where does beauty come from? Where does human skill come from? Well, it's a human skill, but it's a gift from God. Marlene, go ahead.
The Tower of Babel.
The Tower of Babel is an interesting example of human beings trying to reach God, and it's the Bible's telling. The Bible tells the story. In the Bible, it's not because there are gods who create the tower, it's human beings create the tower. And so that will function as an example of this, okay? All right, so it's Ruach Elohim, by building the tabernacle, the workers renew and complete creation. So one of the themes that runs through the entire tabernacle Mishkan narrative, all the last chapters of the book of Exodus, is that the Mishkan, in a sense, is a mirror image of God's created world. And that is chiefly reflected in the place of the Sabbath in the Mishkan, the sanctuary narratives. Just the way that the Sabbath culminates creation, the Sabbath Shabbat culminates these narratives here. Okay, and is always mentioned in a kind of coda to wherever the instructions of the tabernacle are made. So we are already sensing that the Mishkan, part of the role of the Mishkan is to be a mirror of creation, and part of the way that the Mishkan is created is not by God, but by a human being who is very godly. Okay? So I'll just continue to read some of these comments from William Propp. So the temple building was historically ascribed to monarchs and mythically to the gods themselves. This is really an important point that and we could pull up lots of different examples of the deities in ancient related, Ptah, Hephaestus, and Katarova, Hashishu. You could look all of them up. There are interesting pictures of these images. But if the Bible's artisan is God, the human artisan has to be godly. And so Betzalel, I think, becomes a kind of symbolic name. We break it down into Betzalel, which means in the shadow of God, or I haven't seen this in anybody's comment, and so therefore, it's only wrong because no one else has said it, or it could be right because nobody else has thought of this. But to me, it's just so obvious that Betzalel is just an acronym for B'Tselem Elohim, and that he is the archetype of the human being, the creative human being who is in God's image. Look, we're all in God's image. What makes us in God's image? What makes us in God's image? One of the things is that we have power. One of the things is that we have will. And one of the things that makes us an image of God is that we too can create. So the Bible is not an egalitarian book, as we were saying at the beginning, right before we started. The Bible is quite hierarchical. I accept that the biblical worldview is that there's God and there's everybody else. But in the everybody else, there are some exceptional people. Moses is an exceptional person. Abraham is an exceptional person. The elders are exceptional. In the Bible itself, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, the author of Psalm 27, the author of Psalm 23, King David, they're all quite exceptional individuals. So the Bible it doesn't really need to apologize for what is, we can't speak about this, in an open way today because of a radical egalitarian mindset in which everybody needs to have the same outcome, or everybody is seen to be, has the same. What everybody has is the same potential. But there is an idea in the Bible that it takes a Moses, or it takes a Jeremiah, it takes an Isaiah, it takes, an exceptional individual who has unique talents and skills to be able to both receive the word of God, receive the inspiration, and then to activate it and to actualize it in either literary terms, which is the prophetic arts, or in actual spatial plastic ways, that is through a person like Betzalel. So in Hebrew, Betzalel, B'Tselem Elohim, B'Tselem Elohim. Okay. So all of this really suggests the question, well, where does genius come from? And is there something called genius? And so we all know that there is. We all know that there are exceptional human beings throughout history. So what I want to do is just, do some of this exploration with you. And since we are in a visual medium, I'll pull up the visual aids for that. And here is a conversation, a brief conversation on what is genius. Here we go. Hope you got it.
Where does that idea come from? Well, I mean, the idea of genius itself dates back to the ancient Romans. It used to be thought that every single person was born with a genius. And, well, at least every single male was born with a genius. Women had a Juno, which you probably haven't heard of. And notice we're not talking about Junos, we're only talking about geniuses. But it was something that was special. It looked out for your welfare. We'd probably call it a guardian angel. And it was a thing that made you kind of unique. So it really didn't have the special connotations that it has today. But later on, after the Renaissance, when we had these incredible geniuses, people like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, people started coming up with this idea of genius as being something really special. And notice it's very important because in this new idea, not everybody had a genius. Only a few people had a genius. And one of the major figures to do this is Immanuel Kant in his critique of aesthetics or of judgment. And in there, he talked about geniuses as fulfilling two requirements. The first is they have to do something original, something that stands out, different than the crowd. And the second thing, and this is very important because you got to remember that a lot of crazy people can produce original ideas. They do it all the time. There's even an art museum consisted of nothing but work by mad people. You have to produce something that's not just original, but also exemplary. It's something that other people would look up to and admire and use as a basis for their own creativity. So that was those two things, originality and being exemplary, were the primary things. But it's interesting, I should add this, because we included scientists amongst the genius. According to Kant, only artists could be geniuses. Scientists didn't have to be geniuses because they had the scientific method. He even says Isaac Newton wasn't a genius because he could teach anybody to do what he was doing. So it's an interesting thing. But let me just add one more thing, and that is, since I'm a psychologist, psychologists like to take over other people's fields and other people's ideas. And in the early part of the 20th century, somebody came up with an IQ test and decided to define genius in terms of your IQ score instead of in terms of your exemplary originality. This was actually done at Stanford. And this IQ score was set arbitrarily at 140. And that's ended up in the dictionary. It means you're in the top 1% of the population. That's all it means. And so if you don't produce something that's original and exemplary, then just get a high IQ score. There's two ways of doing it.
So with that definition, was genius typically identified early in age with the young, or is it? I mean, I have an example. You know, when I was going to high school, I had a high school classmate who maybe some of you know, Mark, you may know, Noam Elke. You know Noam Elke?
I know. Yeah.
So he's the youngest tenured mathematician at Harvard. And when I was in high school, you know, we would hang around sometimes, talk about pi and, you know, to sort of break the monotony of those math conversations, I once, said to him that I loved the Brahms Rhapsody in G. And he said to me, "Oh, do you mean this?" And he proceeded to simultaneously whistle and hum 2 lines of music of that piece. And I mean, do you know how, just to learn how to hum and whistle at the same, here's like a, you laugh, you try it. No, there's hum and whistle at the same time. And to have 2 separate voices simultaneously, it was clear immediately this guy was just off scale. Is that the kind of way in which genius has been identified?
Well, that's the kind of genius that people often talk about, the polymaths, the people who have multiple skills. And some people argue that general intelligence, they actually call it G, the G factor, can be applied to a lot of different areas. And so if you have tremendous general intelligence, you can learn how to whistle and hum at the same time and do a lot of other things as well. That's your problem.
That's why I'm not over there, right? If I could, I'd be sitting in one of your seats.
Okay, so what that does is what we're trying to do is just explore this idea and in the most general frame that I could mention, it's like the Bible has an idea of genius, and of course the further we move away from the Bible and the biblical world, we get into different ideas. We have this mythological world that it's a separate intelligence or a separate kind of angel. That was the Roman world, where some people had genius meant that they had something else with them. And then of course it's the ability, these extraordinary abilities to think and to create and to come up with some kind of exceptional thing. And so the study of genius, of course, is an incredibly interesting field, and we are all fascinated by that, because genius, of course, affects our lives. Our world has been affected by genius, by the activities of genius, by the thinking. We wouldn't be able to communicate in this manner were it not for certain geniuses. We could say, we could talk about Einstein. Here's just a few people reflecting on Einstein. this was the series.
There are many brilliant people in the world, many people who are very, very intelligent. So I think it has to do with a line of dialogue that I think we have in the first episode, which is a genius is not just answering questions, but asking questions that nobody else thought to ask. You don't need to raise your hand to speak here. There's a particular thing that happens to you when you watch people do something that they're really, really good at. It's a sensation. It can be a 6-year-old kid drawing something, or it can be a painter like applying watercolor, but they're just very, very good. You kind of know whenever you witness somebody being really, really excellent at something. It's a profound experience to be able to be around it, and I think that to me really is watching somebody doing something special.
Unless we can define time. Most people agree that whoever the geniuses are, and you could say it's the people that can combine ideas that are staring everyone else in the face, but they somehow connect something that no one's even thought about. Like Mozart's metronome. I found the quote that Schopenhauer made. He has this great quote where he says, talent hits a target that no one else can hit. Genius hits a target that no one else can see. Close your eyes. And then if you apply that to someone like Einstein, he would engage in what he called thought experiments. He'd just let his mind wander and drift off and speculate about what, He was always obsessed right from his youth. What if I could travel as fast as the speed of light? What would light look like next to me?
Now I'm imagining the ball is traveling in deep space.
The most elegant answer to
Sorry.
the question of what is a genius was given to me by Ron Howard. Scientists, they live in the light of knowledge. They're working they're refining their knowledge, and they're testing things all the time. Some scientists operate at the edge of the light where the dark is, which nobody knows what's in the dark. But a tiny number of scientists jump right into the dark and create their own light around them. It's a combination of vision and absolute determination that you're right, that you're totally convinced that this leap into the dark that you've made is right. And Einstein definitely qualifies, and that, to me, is genius.
I have another question.
Okay, so the idea that of profound imagination and Einstein's genius, which is really responsible for the modern world, and I would go so far as to say that again, the ability to use a technology like that, it's not unrelated. There's not a dotted line from the technologies that we now that make up our world to Einstein. It was transformative. When you take the Betzalel narrative and he's not a god, okay, but he's godly in the sense that God, quote, has filled him up with ruach, with the Spirit of God, and with knowledge, and with these capabilities. And it's almost as if the Bible is trying to say, look, there are exceptional people, we just don't know where these skills come. And from time to time, I guess, and every generation has its exceptional characters. There are some people who stand out in the generations, among the generations, for all sorts of reasons. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, transcend their generations, and their genius speaks to us even now. Einstein, for sure. Would you put a Steve Jobs in that category? Probably not, but I would say, that certainly these are exceptional individuals. Is Elon Musk that kind of individual? Single-handedly revolutionizing automotive transport and maybe space exploration? It's yet to be seen. And so this gets me to the last idea, which is not a video, but it's an article that is really a kind of like, so it's not only where does this come from, but is it available to ordinary people? Can people have extraordinary abilities? And this is this article, Genius Takes Time and Extraordinary Effort. And the theme of this article is some do get a biological start. Some are born with more talent. Others can improve over time. It cannot be stressed enough, though, that the optimum path towards maximum achievement is always through persistent training. And you get the point, which is that, as some would say, you do have some natural skills, but it takes, a lot of time and perseverance. You have to show up every day. You have to do your work. You have to explore. You have to learn. And curiosity is certainly the ability to kind of fuel genius, and that's the idea in a reflection like this. I just zip to the last pages, right? You can see by the headlines here: genius requires extraordinary efforts. Einstein had extremely high intelligence, but he genuinely loved his pursuit of relativity. He was constantly curious and willing to consider radical new ideas. He committed a greater percentage of his productive years pursuing the theory of relativity, and it meant everything to him. Okay. It isn't magic, it isn't born, it happens because some critical things line up so that a person of good intelligence can put in the sustained, focused effort if it takes to achieve extraordinary mastery. So we almost have two poles here. It's like genius is unexplainable, or genius is just natural talent with exceptional persistence. And you can see in the world that both are at play here. Bob, I know you sent some different articles here, and you have some questions here. If you just want to go ahead, ask me the questions for everybody, so that they don't see it in their chats.
Well, just two things. One is that, to what degree is the message that not only is individual genius important, but collective genius working together? And some of what made Zazel special is his ability to both be an individual genius, but to inspire the others he worked with to do it as well. And that one of the books I sent you was about innovation and collective genius. That was the first question.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I didn't pay enough attention to that in the text, but I'm glad you picked up on it. It says that he had his assistant, Oholiav. I always think of Oholivama, Oholiav, whose name I haven't really been able to, Oholi. The scholars of the language say that the idea of my tent, that Ohel, right? It's really a name for the sanctuary. Oholi Av, my God is my tent, and along with Betzalel, I'm thinking like, well, maybe it's an acronym for something I don't know. Betzalel, I mean, to me, it's like clear. It's Betzalel, that's really true, but it's also Betzalel Elohim, which is a kind of pun, which also works. So Ohali Av, the sanctuary, which is a representation of God. That's that I'm imprinted by that also. So that's what the name means. And his ability to create what we would call today teams. That is, genius. It's one thing to have genius, but it's another thing to be able to transform that genius and to build something that works together. That is quite exceptional. And I would say, and here, this is a theme. Amos Oz, the late Amos Oz, spoke about this in lectures, and it's a very profound idea that the Jewish people excels in what he called collective creativity. The Bible itself is a collective creation. When we put the text under a magnifying glass, as scholars do, you do see that there are multiple strands, but they all work together very seamlessly. And that's the Torah. The Bible itself, 24 books, there are different voices there, and it all works together. The Mishnah, the Talmud, the great achievements of Jewish literary civilization are all collective creations. The Jewish community is a collective creation. And then where Amos Oz went in this lecture was Zionism, and the state of Israel is also the great collective create. You can't make a state by yourself. You needed to have an extraordinary group of people do this, and that it's in a way, you want to say that there's genius there. I mean, if you want to call Theodore Herzl a genius, that's debatable. I would say that Theodore Herzl was an exceptional, human being and a genius at his ability to understand diplomacy as the means, the instrumentality to create what he wanted to create. But obviously, he didn't live to create it, and it took the generation after him, the Ben-Gurions and that founding generation, in order to create the state, which was a collective creation and had the spirit of collective genius. And that we look back at that and see that's a miracle. That's there's something that you begin to use poetical phrases. It was the hand of God, the providence is there. All right.
So this is a partial answer to your question, and I think, which is who can make the sacred objects. It's presumably everyone who buys into all of what we've been talking about.
Yes.
It leads me then to the first question I asked, which was, does humility or hineni go along with genius? Because Mozart and others were hardly necessarily humble individuals. So is this task different in terms of where does humility and genius go together?
So I big question, and it's like saying I'm open. Humility is the openness to the influence of something beyond you, but you can have there can be a genius at humility also. It's one of those traits which you can have exceptional ability at, and the rarest of people have that. And some people translate their unique skills into arrogance. So humility is a unique endowment, or I would say I would agree with you only because it's such an important religious category that it would be essential, but it's essential in human development, not only genius. Okay, go ahead, Ilana.
Also, the Siddur in the Shmoneh.
Yes, correct.
You want to say?
I want to. So the Siddur.
Okay, so knowledge and understanding and da'at could be also an de'ah, opinion. All these terms build up a level of not a genius, but help maybe towards it.
Correct. The prayer you're referring to is Ata chonen la'adam da'at. You bestow upon man da'at, knowledge. Ata chonen la'adam da'at umelamed la'anosh bina, and you teach a man understanding. Chanenu mitchad di'ah bina v'haskel. Give us all of these attributes of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And to say, I mean, the fact that it's central in it's one of the 18 blessings in the Shmoneh Esrei only tells you how important the aspiration for, it's not intelligence, but it's wisdom, it's understanding, it's a way of looking at the world. That is a central aspiration of human life. And it's also a way of edifying yourself. Marlene, go ahead.
When we say that blessing in the Shmoneh Esrei, it doesn't mean that we're asking for genius, but rather to be the best we can be.
Indeed. And so this goes to the theme is, are you endowed by God with this exceptional ability, or is it something that if you just, put your work in, you'll be able to do that? And that Malcolm Gladwell, the writer Malcolm Gladwell, has a book in which he talks about people who devote over 10,000 hours. If you in your training spend 10,000 hours doing something, you'll end up having that level of mastery. So it applies to music, it applies to sport, it applies to business, it applies to any field, basically. 10,000 hours seems to be the magic number, the time, he said. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, we've almost spent 10,000 hours here. Well, go ahead, Bob. Last word.
Didn't mean to have last word, but you're bordering a bit on Kabbalah here with the Chokmah and the Binah and the Dot.
I need you to put that in here. So
I knew it,
Yeah.
but I was going to say Chabad. I believe the acronym Chabad comes from exactly those three words.
So indeed, it does, and it's interesting that Chabad, I'm not in that world, of mysticism and Hasidism, but it's interesting how that world, mysticism and Hasidism, took these terms and applied them to the human spirit and as the thing that we create in a human being. That is to say, the human being recreating him herself. That is, you become, as Marlene's just said, you maximize your own potential through the practice of these qualities: wisdom, understanding, introspection, etc. I mean, that's what we spend our lives doing. The more we learn, the more we study, the more we talk, the more we converse, the more we have engage in curiosity. Interesting, Walter Isaacson, I didn't read the book, and it's on my list for a long time, but in another interview he talks about Leonardo's overwhelming curiosity. That what drove Leonardo was just the desire to know, and the curiosity, and that is the one of the greatest human endowments. John.
Another movement, I think, is the Musar movement that
Musar.
helps people to, I guess, become the best they can be.
So Musar had the genius for asking those kinds of questions, which is, how do I perfect these character traits? How do I improve on this? How do I, make myself more humble, more God-fearing, more thankful, etc. And the Musar movement really was organized around, being. Musar means, to be more ethical, certainly, but at the root of it, at the core of Musar is, fearing God and humility, etc. All those traits in the classic works of Musar. All right, folks, we'll leave it there.